We're back today with a brand new show. This is the Classics in Conversation. Today is the debut show and we're doing it on an absolute classic. It's Silence of the Lambs. And talking about Silence of the Lambs, we couldn't not invite our first ever guest, Lucy from Lucy Goes to Hollywood. How you doing, Lucy?
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited and honoured that you picked me to talk about this film.
It's our pleasure. And honestly, we were planning the episode and we were like, immediately, we have to bring Lucy on, no doubts.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm always out to talk about this film, so I'm very excited.
Grand. So I don't really feel like we need to introduce the film. Like I feel like everybody's had ample time to have seen it in their lives.
And if you haven't, that's on you.
Yeah,
it's a choice you've actively made, I think, if you've not seen it.
And a bad choice as well. So So we'll launch straight in. Came out in, I'm going to say 1991, but I think it was 1992.
It was a different US and UK dates.
It was a different US, and that I think is why I'm like, when did it actually come out?
Didn't it come out? It came out like Valentine's Day, right? I think it did.
Yes.
Which is the best time.
Right? That would be the perfect film for me to be like taken on a date to. I'd be like, yes, you're probably the one. Like, I'm thrilled. But I think, I would have liked that to have been like the first horror that I ever saw at the cinema, because mine was The Boogeyman. I don't even know if that really counts as a horror, but it's out there now. You've shared that with you guys. Yep. Good times. What was your guys?
Yeah. Oh,
was it another classic like The Boogeyman?
First horror.
We're digging deep now.
There's been a lot.
They're on the spot.
It was either The Conjuring or Insidious, I think.
Oh, okay.
Date to see Insidious.
They're respectful choices. I like them.
And I remember Insidious, I went with a few friends, and obviously like the famous like Darth Maul scene, right?
Yes.
Like I screamed in the cinema. It was so embarrassing. And like and all my mates were like roasting me because I was like the horror fan of the group, but it got me.
It's scary. That was mine. I genuinely think mine was Insidious as well, but I don't really remember much about the film. Shout out to Joe.
Less we say about that, the better. If Georgie wants to keep going to cinemas.
But no, it's so strange, isn't it? Like, there's so many films you look back on now and you think, oh, I wish I could have seen that in the cinema when it came out. You saw the re-release, didn't you, Heather?
Yes.
Like the 4K one.
Yeah, the BFI did a 4K re-release a couple of years ago, and that was amazing. Because obviously we didn't see it first time around. I think I was 2. But yeah, they did the re-release, and I mean, it was identical to what you'll have seen on telly or DVD or whatever. But there was definitely some bits where I felt like I haven't seen this before. But it was only like landscapes and shots of like the trees. But seeing it so massive, and there was definitely like only us in the screening, which I think was like a bummer. But like
that's a shame.
Yeah, I thought it was a shame but I don't think their 4K season was like that widely advertised. I think it was on at 4:00 on a Sunday, so. It's not great time either to be sort of showing this kind of thing. But yeah, that was a real experience. And I definitely, having had seen it once, I would go again. Yeah. Like, I definitely think if you can see it, like, it's definitely worth going. I don't know whether the BFI will maybe do it again. It was part of their 4K series. And they did like Alien and some others.
I had a really good experience seeing Silence on the big screen. I don't know if you guys knew me at the time, but it was the edible cinema version of it.
Oh, yes.
So it was like, it had like you had like mystery little pots with like, and they would like hold up a sign with like a number, and then you would open that pot when the scene came on.
That sounds
so, like
amazing.
obviously you had like, you know, you had Chianti at one point, you had all this stuff. It was really cool. Yeah.
If they ever do a secret cinema version, which would be terrifying, we have to go.
Honestly, that it's kind of a spoiler, but like the grossest thing that they showed was like, you know, when they're dissecting like her body and they get the pupa out of it.
Yeah.
They had like a really smelly cheese.
Oh.
To kind of emphasize how gross it was. And I was like, oh, it was not good.
Oh my gosh.
That sounds incredible but horrific at the same time.
That does sound incredible.
Right?
Yeah.
And I can't have cheese because I'm lactose intolerant. So I was just like, nope.
Extra no.
It was one of those things. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So it was, edible cinema is fantastic.
That sounds
good. If you ever see one, go, because they're brilliant.
That sounds so good.
So good. I for one second did think you just meant you were on edibles. I was like, cool, right, okay.
I mean, I'm not Pedro Pascal, but you know,
it's not The Incredibles 2.
The Incredibles 2. Oh my god.
Oh, that was funny.
I feel like Silence of the Lambs in the cinema on edibles would be an experience.
Oh, my god.
Like the sound design alone, I think, would be the worst bit. Because you can't escape that. Like, you could be like, but that sound's not going away.
Any Buffalo Bill scene,
like,
no thanks.
To the cultural impact of that film, though, the fact that I got your back. The fact that even now they're with, not to sound like a boomer, all the leaps and bounds we've come on with.
Okay, cinema, boomer.
But like the fact that it's still so creepy and eerie, and that ambience that is very, very typical of that film. Yeah, it's very emblematic of that film, of that kind of psychological horror, is still so profound. And the fact they're still doing things like what you said, Lucy, that whole edible cinema thing, and they're still finding new ways to show it. It is a timeless classic.
It is the timeless classic, which is why I'm glad, you know, we picked it to like begin the classic section. I don't know why I'm Italian now, but
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you did. Yeah. Because I mean, there's always that debate between whether it is a horror film or not. And this is sort of a classics with a particular look at horror this season. But I would consider it to be a horror film. I think in its lifespan, it's become slightly less so, but only less so with like the huge what's the word I'm looking for, sort of rising like true crime and like Mindhunter and things like that. But I think if you didn't have them, it would still be like a horror film.
Yeah, I've always argued that it was a horror, and like people get really defensive about like the horror psychological thriller argument, and you know, like whatever you think is fine because you can't really define it. But I think it has horrific elements by definition. Like, you know, like the Buffalo Bill like night vision sequence is probably one of the most horrifying things. And on the big screen, you're like, oh my god, you know, it utilizes elements from the horror genre. So I would argue that it is a horror personally. Yeah. But some people think it's not, but I do.
I agree. I think like exactly down to what you said about the horror, the horrific elements. We quite often in conversation are saying it is, you know, it has this horror in it, so therefore it is a horror film. But you've got scenes where in I want to say the library, it's not a library, in that big room at the end where he makes the angel, like he makes an angel out of a person, and then he gets up in the ambulance and he's got a different man's face on. I mean, that's not really a thriller. Like, that's horrible.
No, I think it's a shame because like I don't want to sound like one of those like, oh, back in the old days kind of people, but like, you know, horror has certainly become like jump scares and like really visceral CGI, you know, like all the Saw films. Like I love the first Saw film, but I'm critical of the latter ones because they're just too gory. 100%. And I think with Silence, it's very implied. Yes. And I think that makes people think it's not a horror, but I would say it is.
I'm so sorry, the parsnip's just licking her bum, like, right there.
Parsnip, really?
just carry on.
No, don't worry. It's very implied, and I think that people are kind of turned off by it because they're like, oh, it's not scary, but I think it is scary.
Yeah.
Like when they're describing like the Polaroid of the nurse's face, you don't see it, but you think it, and that's really scary. It's like you can compare that to like the first Saw film when Dr. Gordon's cutting his foot off, right? Like you don't see him do it. It's the implication, and that to me is more scary. But
yes, 100%.
People like blood and guts these days, unfortunately.
Well, that's it. Yeah.
Like, how often do I say to you, I am a broken record, and you already know exactly what I'm going to say. Horror films are not scary when you see the thing you're supposed to be scared of.
Yeah.
And it's my criticism with like 90% of horror films. It's either A, it's over an hour and a half long, or B, you see the scary thing. Both of these are unacceptable to me. And
I think,
as soon as you see it, your illusion's gone, because at the end of the day, the whole theory she's off. The whole theory behind what makes a monster is that it's what happens in your imagination. It can't be pinpointed. As soon as you show it, it's no longer a monster.
Yeah, it's like Rosemary's Baby, right? You never see the baby, and people still consider that to be a horror. And it's like, well, by definition, surely silence should be as well, right? That's what I think.
Yeah,
but
I agree. I think, like you say, so much of contemporary horror is based in like a spectacle over like an actual, I don't want to be like piece of cinema, but like, like you say,
the horror for grown-ups.
Like the later Saw films were just a gross fest to take your friends to and see who was gonna like wig out first. Human Centipede, it's like an endurance test, that you put your mates through, and at the end of it, it's kind of boring. Like you're like, I'm looking forward to watching. Is it Spiral? It's coming out.
Yeah,
that is great because they've taken what they have and they've gone, actually, we're going to dial some bit back, and we're going to bring a bit more of this, a bit less, oh man, my brain has gone to sleep. That barbed wire maze that he has to go through, and just sort of almost chilled out those aspects a bit. Like, it doesn't have to be, like you say, the most gory or the most visceral or the most jump scare scenes to get people engaged. But again, like you said, the slow burn aspect could be particularly off-putting for some people who are there for like the high octane action. But like the book is also a slow burn, so I think that reflects it well. Like if all of a sudden you were like, oh, there's like 17 more gore scenes than we expected, I think that would lose a bit of integrity between like the adaptations.
Yeah, I think, obviously I don't want to insult our audience or anything, but I think, younger audience members are kind of having more of a shorter attention span, I think. So like people like before our generation, they just want like action. Whereas like we like a slow burn. And like Silence of the Lambs, it is a slow burn. Like the book is very, very slow. And it focuses on, like Clarice, obviously she is the central character. It's basically about her, battling this male-dominated industry and kind of, battling wits with Hannibal to try and catch this crazy killer, right? And it is thrilling when you think about it. Like it doesn't have to show ridiculous amounts of whatever to make its point. I just love it. It's my baby, and I adore it. I love the book as well. I read the book in like 3 days. Like I adore it. Like it's just so good. Yeah.
I have to admit, I have a paperback from the 80s. I think it was my dad's that I like. I'm gonna sneeze. That I read loads. That's like my take it out and read it. So like I take it like on holiday, as you do. There's no better beach book than Silence of the Lambs. It's perfect. It's a perfect beach read. And then I have like a couple of special ones that like don't get read. They just like live on the shelf.
Yeah.
And whenever I sort of say to someone like, oh yeah, I really like Silence of the Lambs and like the book, and I have like a few, and they're like, a few what? And I'm like, editions, like, but it's just they're perfect.
I wish I did. I have one edition and I'm so sad.
I have the old 80s one that was my dad's, and then I have a first edition UK print. And I'm forever on the hunt. I have like 6 Google alerts set up for like first edition first. That's like my white whale is like finding that first print first edition day one. But I can't even find what it looked like. So I'm like, is it this? Maybe not.
Yeah.
No. I need to treat myself to like the Steel Book of Silence.
Ooh, yeah.
It's beautiful, but I haven't got it yet. But it's gorgeous. Like it's got like a sort of almost like sort of Rorschach style print on the front.
Ooh,
beautiful.
Nice.
I really want it.
That sounds really cool.
You should treat yourself to
one day. It's on Zavi, I think, if anybody's interested, but I really want it.
If anyone's interested, we can send you her postal address as well, where you can send it to her as a gift.
If you want.
So what do you guys think of how the book was adapted? Do you, because this is gonna shock and appall viewers, because it's a sentence I don't get to say very often. I have never read the book.
Get out.
Oh my god.
Hang on, where's the end? Where how do I hang up? How do I kick
it's
Georgie?
awful, isn't it?
Bye.
Sorry, I'm going through a tunnel. I can't hear you.
I know. I never, like, it's so odd that I'm normally like that person, the annoying one, the dickhead about it. It's like, but I've never actually read it. I would love to. So I'm very intrigued to know how you feel that adaptation was handled, because obviously the film is wildly critically acclaimed. You know, horror at the Oscars, what? So I'm really intrigued to know kind of how that would play in with the book.
I think the key difference is that the very end of the book, obviously the famous scene when he rings Clarice is a letter in the novel, but it wouldn't have translated as well on screen. It was more impactful for him to ring her at her FBI thing. And I didn't mind that change because I thought it made more sense for the screen.
Yeah.
Like a letter wouldn't have been as, in your face. Yeah,
especially with...
It's quite shocking,
seeing like Chilton getting off the plane.
Yeah, exactly. So, it was a very clever way to sort of make it more cinematic, because you kind of have Clarice's big sort of triumph. She's getting her like, I am a proper FBI agent, badge and all that, and then you get this phone call, and obviously she gets the letter, which is it's jarring in the book, but in the film it just hits you. And I didn't mind that change. I thought that was really good, but I think on the whole it adapted it very well. Because Jodie Foster was amazing as Clarice. It was always Clarice's story. Hannibal is kind of a secondary character when you think about it. Like, obviously it's kind of about him, but he's basically a supporting character because it's not about him. I think the way Thomas Harris wrote Clarice is wonderful to me. It's very special, and it's very nice to see female FBI agent. There's no romantic connotations at all. There's no need for that. It's all just about getting this killer. She's very motivated, and she has to put up with a lot of bullshit in the FBI. As you see in the film when she gets into the lift and there's all these like tall men around her. It's very implied in the book. So I think it was a very good adaptation in my opinion.
I agree. I think the way that it was filmed, particularly like the camera angles, like Lucy said, where she gets in the lift, she's nearly always like framed as a lot smaller than the men. I know Jodie Foster's like teeny weeny anyway, but like particularly smaller, and there's always like men looking at her as well, which I think is like a really interesting way to constantly reinforce that fact that she is like kind of at the mercy of these men. Like particularly as well when they're at that funeral home with the last body that they find, and she's like just her in like a sea of those policemen and all in the uniforms just looking at her, like trying to sort of almost figure out why she's there. And I think the adaptation's really good. Like, I'm glad that the sort of friendship and relationship between her and Map still sort of like came through really well, because she plays like a really integral part in the other books. And I liked it. I'm happy with it. I'm happier with it than I am with Hannibal. But that's another no. Actually, I'm going to rephrase that because that has strange connotations. I like the film ending of Hannibal more than I like the book ending.
I'm the other way around.
Ooh, I like it. Do you know, I must admit, I switch between the two, but I'm like, I kind of lean more towards her. I feel like for the character they portrayed in the film, that ending was right. And I feel like the way she lost something when she went to Florence.
I love how cryptic you're being right now, by the way.
Like, it's been out for a million years.
Yeah.
So we could just like smash the spoiler down. But I just feel like it's a shock if you haven't actually read the book that I'm gonna do it anyway, really. That she runs off with Hannibal at the end of Hannibal.
I never actually read the book, by the way.
So she runs off with Hannibal at the end of Hannibal and lives as his wife.
Basically, yeah. And I can understand why you'd be like, okay, well, what's with your little speech about Clarice being like, so whatever.
Yeah.
But I think Hannibal was the only real person that showed her any respect.
Yeah.
Throughout the entire book. Funnily enough, he's a serial killer who eats people, but he's the only person that respects her.
Yeah.
But,
and
aside from Crawford, but they've got other men, like Chilton's an asshole, obviously.
Yes.
Like it's, and I just feel that Clarice was perhaps drawn to the thrill of it.
I also wonder whether the change in power dynamics in Hannibal sort of puts them on a much more equal footing, and she's sort of she's had a disgrace from the FBI and the incidents of the fish market and things like that. So she's sort of like she's been ostracized the way he was for being a cannibal. Not the same as being a cannibal, but like she's on the outskirts the same as he is. But also shout out to Barney, who is generally a good guy. Like he's like respectful to women and only comes on to like Mason's sister. So and she says no.
Low the bar is.
And he says no, and she says no, and he respects that, and they move on. So
I mean, Mason's the worst, though. Mason's the worst. Like I think Gary Oldman was fantastic in Hannibal. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I know we're not talking about Hannibal, but like as far as the film went,
part and parcel.
He's just so fucking creepy.
Yeah,
horrible.
Between Mason and like Cordell as well, like those two in Hannibal, you're just like. They almost make Buffalo Bill like a distant memory, even though I think Buffalo Bill is like a more frightening character.
It's really hard, isn't it? Because like obviously you can't condone, acts of violence, but you almost can't blame Hannibal for what he did to Mason. Because you're like, fair enough.
I think after that,
you're a pedophile, you're a piece of shit. Like,
get in the pig pen. See you later. Like.
I mean, he hurt children, right? Which is like, you don't do that. So like, I understand.
Yeah,
Hannibal's
he was
got
like
a twisted sense of
of judgment. He was definitely like because he's like a completely like he's like not checked by morals. Like Mason's like does not care for anything that is right or wrong. Like he completely lives for basically just acting out his impulses. Like he abuses Margot. He like just all the way through her life abuses Margot. He abuses children. He's like emotional abuse, physical abuse. He like hires people to make snuff films for him and all sorts of stuff. So really, like the only fitting end was to be eaten by pigs.
Yeah. It's a really lovely story, Georgie. I recommend it.
Yeah,
it's great. That's it. Like I think. From what you said there, I think what Silence does, and by the sound of it, Hannibal, is there's really interesting shifts in agency and shifts in gaze and shifts in focus that are all executed flawlessly, really. Because I think sometimes you can really, if you kind of fumble the bag on that, you can really just mess it up and it becomes really choppy and incoherent. But especially with Clarice and Hannibal, that kind of power dynamic and the shifts in gaze and agency, like you said, Luce, it's Clarice's story. He's really a minor character. He's part and parcel of what she has to say. And I think we were talking about it before, the scene in the in like the morgue with the camera angles for Clarice when it's kind of looking up at her but then back down again. I think it's just really interesting little choices like that are just really clever, really clever.
It's incredibly considered, like all the way through. Like the way they film like Hannibal, and then like the way they film Clarice, like I think they're the few scenes where they're actually looking at Clarice at like eye level, like backwards and forwards again, sort of like looking at it in a way of like respect, but also like interest, and like a sort of dual sense of them both being somewhat like in a cage. And yeah, I think there's so much to be said about the way that whole film is like edited and put together, and like the choices that they made there. Like we said about the sound and stuff earlier, like that stuff still haunts.
Yeah.
Oh God, I know. It's like even just the scene when she's like the opening scene when she's jogging through the woods.
Yeah.
And it's like she's running from nothing. She's just training at the FBI, right? And but you know shit's gonna go down. Like it's a great soundtrack. And obviously that's the point when she gets called into the office, and then everything kicks off. I just think she's one of the strongest female characters that we have, and people don't give her enough credit, honestly. I remember I got really angry because you can't get a Funko Pop of Clarice, and I'm really pissed off because I want one.
That's a really bad show, because I've got a Hannibal one.
I have two Hannibals, I've got one from the TV show and one from the film, but
so I
and they don't exist, and I'm like, oh,
shocking.
But because she's amazing, she's an incredible figurehead for strong women. Like her dad was a policeman who got killed. She's really passionate about law enforcement. She's a badass bitch. I love it a bit. Like I would die for Clarice. She's amazing.
We stand Clarice every day.
It's the film's about her, really. It's about, and obviously, yes, she makes that crucial mistake when she gets let into his house and all that, but she does it ultimately without the help of all these men. It was her that did this. And
I think that's really interesting, because like when Crawford goes to the wrong house, they are a huge team armed to the teeth, and when Clarice goes to the house, it's just her in like her nice little coat and a gun and her sensible shoes, like ready to like lay down some law. It's that point.
Police officer we accept is Clarice Starling.
When she's like in the kitchen, and like you just sit there like going through the business cards, and you're just like, shit, like this is it. This is the point where it's all gonna come to head, and you're like, is she gonna make it out? I don't know what's gonna happen. And I think even like I watch it every year, and that bit still, I'm like, oh my God, what's gonna happen? It's so tense.
I don't know if it was the same for you seeing it on the big screen, but that night vision scene on the big screen is, oh my God.
I think like
nothing can compare.
I think the weight of it is like massively amplified, because it's like all you see is like her vulnerability in like how,
and she's
again,
like searching in the dark, and it's like, oh,
as well, because it's like, I like that it's not a nighttime scene that looks like daytime but with like a dark sky. Like we're looking at a green and white night vision scene, and she's there like flailing around the walls, and you're just like, shit, she's got no idea. She's just like
die,
she's completely like out of her depth to a degree, and she's like completely vulnerable, and she's literally just blind in the dark.
This is more so than any of the cannibalism scenes or any of the kind of more gruesome scenes. If someone ever doubts that it's a horror film, that is the sequence that I would show them. And like, how are you not scared by that? You know, that how is that not unnerving deeply in your soul, you know?
Yeah, because really, like if you went through it like scene by scene, there's probably very little actual visceral sort of gore that you see. Like you know, you see obviously the dead body, but even then it's like aspects of it, the diamonds on her back, things like that. Photographs that are just like seconds of Polaroids. But there's not like a huge deal beyond that until Hannibal gets out and starts stabbing. But sort of by that point, like the film's already like reaching like a fever point, so you're kind of like, this is like the perfect time for this momentum to be getting like ramped up. And like when and we're just like going through it and we're just being like, this scene's incredible, but like when he gets off the plane and Chilton's like, where's my pen, I'm always like,
oh yeah.
Like, you left it in his cell, you big tit. Like, so good.
I know. It's funny because you're so anti-Crawford the entire film.
Yeah.
Like you just
like
want
he's
him
the true villain. Like
he's the true villain,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh,
he's such a bad dick.
Slimy, horrible. Yeah. Reminds me of the likes of like Lucius Malfoy. Like just horrible, slight. Yeah, just not good.
Yeah.
Not good. Oh God, I hate that man. He's not even real, but I hate him.
Yeah, and I think he was really well portrayed as well, because there's almost like when he first meets Clarice, he's like, I'm not going to say charming because he's not, but that's what he's aiming for. And it's all like smiles and happiness. And then as soon as she's like, oh no, sorry, it's like a completely different person takes over.
The first time he meets her, he said, I don't think I've met an FBI agent that's attractive or something. And it's like, fuck off.
Yeah,
like,
and he's like,
literally.
This can be quite a fun town if you know what I mean. And you're like, stop it.
And Clarice is like, nope, not doing it.
Don't want to, thank you. And I think as well, because it's so minor, that sort of like, not subtle come on, but like, I say subtle in like subtle like a brick, but where if you weren't a woman or like a young woman, you may not notice that for what it is. But I think like watching it, you're like, he's a creep.
Yeah.
Say no, Clarice, you're worth way better than this.
That's the thing that I think is really interesting. That's a really interesting comment.
Thank you.
Because it's a film, I think, that speaks to men and women very, very differently. I mean, horror, gothic horror especially, back in the day, was written. She's off again.
Okay,
oh my
bloomer.
God. Like 19th century boomer was written with the women in mind, and women were the prime audience for things like gothic horror. And I think Silence of the Lambs is a film that speaks to women in a really interesting way, because I think we're probably going to come on to this in a moment, so I might be jumping the gun.
You can lead us in if you like. This comment sounds exciting.
Hello.
It's happening.
There's obviously much debate about the implications of representation throughout the film, particularly with regards to Buffalo Bill. And I don't want to rehash loads of critical study about it. It's out there if you want to look at it, and we can give you some recommendations. But there's, I think, one particular essay that I find really interesting. It's by Jack Halberstam in the fantastic, but I'm not on commission, book Skin Shows, where he talks about the notion of how Buffalo Bill kind of presents gender versus sexuality versus just skin. And, just putting on the skin of somebody else, it's a very external show of gender. And I think the film does a really good job of, it scares men, not women. Even though women are being hunted, it's a film about this fragile nature of masculinity with a woman, like you said, Liz, a strong, independent woman at the head of it. I think it speaks very differently than a lot of horror films, where women are often, nowadays in horror films, the victims. Obviously, we've got our amazing final girls and what have you, but women are often receiving violence in a way that is scarier to women than I think Silence is. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I agree. I think especially like a massively key point is the fact that even when Buffalo Bill kidnaps his women, there is no sexual aspect, not to the women he has captured anyway. These women, I mean, they might fear that something may happen to them, they don't know what's going to go on, but there is nothing in it at all that is, almost like an assault on their person. We don't know. He could drug them and skin them. And I'm not saying that's any better, but what I am saying is that it is not a on-screen huge depiction of an assault on women that's like visceral and upfront and unavoidable. It's like you say, the violence against women is minor for a film about women being kidnapped. That is, I think, the way I want to frame that.
Yeah, so the violence against women is there. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. And as I said, I really would encourage people to read that particular essay. We'll put some details about it in the description.
Yeah.
But it's Buffalo Bill saying not that he's in the wrong body, but that he's in the wrong skin, which I think is a really, really interesting distinction, especially in a film that's about psychology and about, you know, it just the framing of the like the heterosexist conditioning of like man, woman, just being dismantled in a really interesting way. And I think women and people that identify as such can take something from that film that a man or someone who would identify as such would not be able to take from him.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is, it's interesting that you bring this up. Like, I've watched this film with a lot of different people, and I think the goodbye horses scene has made men more uncomfortable than it has women.
Yeah,
and it's very interesting in the sense that Buffalo Bill almost sort of strips himself of his masculinity, and it makes men uncomfortable because, you know, it's the tuck, the, you know, the would you
kimono
be seen, right? It's the sort of, it's the narcissism, it's the wanting to love you and wanting to be somebody else, the transformation. People don't like that. And I've seen some criticisms of it. Like, obviously I cannot comment as a trans person, of course I can't, but, you know, I have seen some criticisms. But for the most part, it's men that are uncomfortable by it, which is very interesting, actually.
Yeah, and I think I think with that as well, there's the idea that like he's quite like a feminine man as well. Like, he can sew really well. Like, he knows exactly what he's doing. And as well, like, you know, he has a lot of classically feminine, I say in inverted comments for the podcast people, traits, and he embodies quite a lot of them. You know, his long hair, he's got really good eyebrows, you know, he's putting his makeup on, he's got a really slight figure. Like, he's obviously got like strength to kidnap these women, but he's got like, you know, a really like lean sort of physique in the kimono, and like you say, the goodbye horses scene. But also, like, Hannibal is, when he's not eating faces, like, he's really soft. Like, he's softly spoken. He's, you know, he's almost like gentle in his conversations with Clarice. Like, he gives her a towel. You know, he looks after her when she's like caught in the rain. Punishes Miggs. I mean, that scene, like, that's one of the big horrors from that film. Like, that is an assault on women. Like, I will like rectify my earlier statement. And he has that sense of manners that are like so ingrained that he isn't like a macho man killer. Like, again, he is a softer sort of masculine character, and I think that's really interesting. I don't think there's like a huge amount of like super manly men, like the traditional mask kind of character, like within that film. I think you don't really meet him until you meet like Paul Krendler in the second one.
Yeah, I think that they're very much like sort of in the background characters, like in the FBI, you know, like even Jack Crawford has some sympathy towards Clarice. He's not a dickhead.
Yeah.
You know, like, he's trying his best, but like it's a scene in the lift that tells you everything you need to know about these men. They kind of look down on it.
Yeah.
And that's all you need to know. You never meet these people. But you're right. It's Paul and Hannibal is when you really start to see how shitty they are.
Yeah. And I think like there's like, you see obviously like the police detective in the lift in the later part when Hannibal's broke free, but he's just completely orientated with manning his team. So he's almost like faceless. That could be anyone doing that job. But I think the actual lack of presence of like, in, you know, really outwardly masculine men is a really interesting, whether it was like a choice, I mean, I assume, but like, it's a really interesting concept, especially for the book, to write something that's so lacking in like this male character. Like, Crawford, I think you could argue really is almost like one side of a father figure, and then Hannibal kind of gives like a bit and then really doesn't give like that anymore. And obviously you have like the love interests that try and be there. And that's also referenced between, you know, from Hannibal to Clarice about Crawford. And I think it's interesting in a way as well that she's just played with so much like dignity. Like she knows when to rise up to something and when to just politely be like, no thanks. And I think that speaks to having grown up to, you know, saying no a lot of the time.
Yeah, she puts up with a lot of shit. I mean,
she does put up with a lot of shit.
When Hannibal first meets her, he says, "You're one of Jack Crawford's, aren't you?" He doesn't, you know, it's very much you belong to Jack.
Yeah.
And I think that's what she's getting sick of. It's like, no, I'm not. you know, like I'm my own person. And then he kind of heckles her and starts like taking the piss out of like, you know, her shoes and all that stuff. You know, and it's and I think that the first meeting it gets to her because she cries in the car park.
Yeah.
But after that point, she starts to learn how to communicate with him.
Yeah.
Because it's not like any normal person. You have to play his game, unfortunately. Yeah. So it's the whole quid pro quo thing, right? It's the whole right. Okay, fine. I'll give you what you want, you know. And she plays him with the whole island thing with the birds and that, you know, like.
Yeah.
So she does one up him at one point, so he starts to realize, hang on a minute, you're not as stupid as I thought you were, and it's
exactly.
It's his defense mechanism to taunt people, Hannibal, and I think it's what a psychopath would do. They would try and like just belittle you as much as they could. But she's having none of it.
Yeah.
And that's what's so great about her, because she eventually hits back and then she succeeds. You know, she plays his stupid games and she eventually wins. And I love that for her.
I think she shows that like even in that really short space of time, there's a huge amount of like personal growth and like self-belief and like confidence in that she is capable and like she's out here doing this. And all right, she may have been sent because she has like a beautiful face, but also she's got like the brains that no one expects of her, so she's going to use them.
I think that first meeting is so well constructed and scripted and shot, and it's just it is just so well done, because I think it's one of those things that unfortunately probably a lot of women can kind of relate to, being made to being felt like that. That was the worst English I've ever said out loud. I think
loved it.
I was just I butchered that, didn't I? But you know what I mean. And I think the way that it was dealt with, and like you said, her then toward the end, exactly as you said, kind of thinking, actually, wait, no, okay, quid pro quo, let's
do this,
game and beat you at it. And I think that is a splendid trajectory.
I wonder as well if there's like a degree of relief, like she's obviously held on to these things, not willing to maybe show a bit of weakness or like admit these feelings from when she was like on the ranches and what have you, but like here's this person behind the safety of this glass between the two of them, who's he gonna tell if she admits these things to him? Like either no one would care or no one would believe him, so she can tell him this, essentially this stranger removed from everybody else, like these things that have maybe been holding her down.
See, the quote that I like about this, she's quoting Theory now, is that psychology isn't an excuse for horror in this film, it's what generates it. And I love that. I think it's great
quote.
And it's exactly that, isn't it? It's normally you have horror explained away with psychology, but in this film, that is actually the root cause of all the horrific things that are happening, and all the stress and the trauma is a direct cause of a psychiatrist. Like that's his job.
And I think that's I think that's a lot of where his power comes from. It comes from the fact that like his biggest like weapon is his mind, and how to wield that and how to get into other people's minds and use their sort of, whether subconscious or not, their thoughts and fears against them, same as he did for Miggs, and does a bit more later in Hannibal. I think it's referenced because of the way he is with Mason, but
I think obviously Paul is the main shock and death in that film.
Oh yeah, I love that scene.
It's so good that I usually forget what the other ones are, to be honest, because that brain scene is just so good that you just forget.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he gets Patsy goes out the window, doesn't he? I was like, what are the other ones?
Yes. His intestines. Yeah. Got it. Yeah.
I love that one because I do like Hannibal for the killings because they're really like poetic, and I like that, which is obviously like why I'm a big fan of the show. Love me like a tableau. I'm always like, ooh, what's it gonna be today?
Yeah.
One's on a stag. Like, great. So I think we've covered everything that we're going to cover about Silence of the Lambs. I think we could probably go on forever. Like, I'm fairly sure we could do a show about Silence of the Lambs and it would never end and we would never run out of things to say. But I think for the sake of you guys and how long it's going to take to export, we're going to probably wrap it up. So we did ask on the socials for everybody's thoughts and feelings on Silence of the Lambs. So we'll throw a few of them in. Lucy, you had a few people reply to you. Who have you got and what did they say?
I need to get them up now. Hang on. Very professional.
That's very okay.
Professional. I have it in my DMs.
Nice.
Hang on. There we go. So I had one from my friend JD who said it is a cracking psychological thriller with a very scary Anthony Hopkins.
Nice.
I agree.
It's true, but it's a horror film, JD, not just a psychological thriller. So I'm sorry, but you're wrong.
It is certainly one of Anthony Hopkins' scariest roles, I would say. So certainly that's true. We also had Kate D. Film Geek, who said, one of the best films ever made. Correct.
Yep. Agree.
Clarice and Lecter are two of the best characters in film. Also true.
Also true. Well done. You get like 10 out of 10.
Very, very good. Yeah, and I got one.
Bias aside, that's just true, isn't it? Like, if you look at like this, the history of cinema, it's actually just fact. One of the best films that's ever been made.
There was actually a documentary ages ago on Channel 4 about like psychopaths, and there was these experts who were saying that like the conversation between Hannibal and Clarice was like spot on. Yeah, that's what it would have been. And I was like, this is it just validates my opinion. And I got one more from Zoe because she likes to troll me, and it says, "It's shit. I'm joking." but Mads is a better Hannibal.
Oh,
well,
first of all,
please weigh in.
First of all, Zoe is a guest later on in the series, and she's just been cancelled. But no, there's room in my heart for both. Do you know what I'm saying? Mads he's an entirely different kettle of fish. Yes. I would have run off with him a la book Hannibal if that had been the case, let's just say. And I've completely lost my train of thought thinking about the little Danish pastry. So we'll move on to...
Indeed. So that's all by DMs, yes.
Nice. I got a couple replied to us on the Valks Instagram. So we had Anna.create who said, "It gives me chills every time I watch it, but in a good way." So take that as you will, but we also agree. We do. And Kim, who is Wicked Sister 69, who I don't know if you know. Yeah,
I love Kim. Yeah, she's great.
She's such a good egg. She's amazing. Sometimes contributes for us on the site. She says she loves it because strong women, Clarice and Catherine, and take down the bad guys. That's a really good point. We didn't really mention Catherine Martin, and I'm glad Kim gave her a little shout out because she, to be fair, just keeps on going. Like, she's down a well. There's fingernails in the wall, and she makes a plan to get Precious, to get Buffalo Bill to like try and let her out. Props to Catherine. She's like a pretty impressive final girl, I would go so far as to say.
She is, because at first I think, like, I'll phrase this like correctly, but at first she kind of annoys you a little bit.
Yeah, she does, yeah.
and then you realise, hang on a minute,
She's
you
in
don't
a
deserve
well.
to be down there. Like, you're in a well. Like,
you're in a well, for goodness sake.
You're in a well.
Fair enough, you were a little bit annoying, but you were just trying to help somebody. You were trying to help a guy.
It's when she says,
Mhm.
I'm not going to say it because it's a phrase that you don't really hear in polite conversation anymore. But when he's struggling, obviously fakely struggling to get that big chair into the van, and she goes to help him, and she just asks him something that's really quite personal, just straight out the gate. And I'm like, Jesus, Catherine, have you no tact for the poor man?
It's not something we'd say nowadays. Certainly not.
No, not polite. But still, didn't deserve to be put down a well. But I also like the fact that when she's coming out, she's like, I'm keeping the dog.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I mean, you know, Precious is fine, but he's got his little feet are too tappy for me. I wasn't a fan. So, like, the dog score, he's getting like a 4 out of 10.
Okay.
Precious is not getting the 10 out of 10 score.
No.
Feet are too tappy. And I think that's where I think we're going to round it off at Precious's little tappy toes.
Mm-hmm.
This has been Sounded Lambs. This has been the Classics in Conversation. Lucy, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you. It's been a blast. I've loved it.
It's been a pleasure and a joy to have you with us. And we'll be back for more when we have a whole host of things lined up, some different films, and I'm going to tell you the next one. We're talking about The Thing. So that's coming up a little later this month with 2 guests who you might well recognize. So we'll see you soon. Stay safe. Be good. Wear your damn masks.
Not other people's faces, though.
Not other people's faces.
No.
Yes.
No,
Someone else's face is not adequate mask material. So keep it to them. All right. And we'll see you again soon. Bye.